Before humanity's first breath, before Eden's gates ever opened, before a single footprint marked the earth, 7 creatures already existed. And they weren't anything like what you've been told. Most people picture angels as gentle beings with white wings and glowing halos. That image comes from Renaissance art, not ancient texts. The actual biblical descriptions read more like cosmic horror than Sunday school lessons. Beings covered entirely in eyes. Creatures made of living fire. Forms so terrifying that looking directly at them could kill you. These weren't decorative additions to heaven. They had jobs, ranks, hierarchies. And some of them rebelled. The strangest part? These descriptions exist in plain text across Genesis, Ezekiel, Isaiah, Job, and Revelation. They're not hidden in obscure footnotes or lost translations. They're right there. Yet somehow, most modern interpretations gloss over the details that make these beings genuinely alien to human comprehension. Let's start with the ones everyone thinks they understand. Angels. The Hebrew word is malachim, which literally translates to messengers. You're probably imagining something beautiful and harmless. That's the problem. In Genesis chapter 18, 3 angels appear at Abraham's tent. They look so convincingly human that Abraham doesn't recognize what they are. He washes their feet like honored guests. He prepares an entire meal of fresh bread, curds, and roasted calf. They sit down and eat every bite. They discuss Sarah's upcoming pregnancy in casual conversation. Abraham treats them like travelers, not celestial beings. But those same messengers walk into Sodom the next day and the entire atmosphere shifts. An angry mob surrounds the house where they're staying. The angels respond by striking every single person in that crowd blind. Not selectively, the entire mob. Then they physically grab Lot's family by the hands and drag them out of the city before fire erases Sodom from existence. These aren't harp players. They're operatives who shift from dinner guests to city destroyers within hours. Here's the detail everyone overlooks. Every single time angels appear to humans in the Old Testament, their opening line is identical. Do not be afraid. It shows up in Genesis, in Judges, in Daniel, in Luke, over and over, like a required disclaimer. Think about that phrase for a moment. You don't walk into a room and immediately say, "Don't be afraid," unless the person you're addressing is visibly terrified. If angels looked like the pleasant figures in your grandmother's paintings, why would fear be the default human response? The human disguise is exactly that. A disguise. A way to interact with people without triggering complete psychological collapse. Their true form causes a primal fear response that shuts down rational thought. We know angels existed before humans. Job, chapter 38 tells us that when God laid the foundations of the earth, angels were already there. The text calls them morning stars and describes them singing and shouting for joy as the universe took shape. They watched creation happen. They were the original audience. 2 Kings chapter 19 gives us a glimpse of their actual capability. A single angel goes out at night and kills 185,000 Assyrian soldiers in one evening. One angel. 185,000 soldiers. By morning, the entire Assyrian army besieging Jerusalem was a field of corpses. The text describes this almost casually, as if this is simply what angels do when given the order. But here's what makes the Malachim fascinating from a hierarchical perspective. They're the lowest-ranking beings in heaven's structure. They're foot soldiers, messengers, the ones God sends to interact with humans because they can take a form we can actually survive encountering. The creatures ranking above them make regular angels look like administrative assistants. That brings us to the archangels. The Protestant Bible only names one by that specific title. Michael. Just one confirmed archangel across 66 books. But the Book of Enoch, which Ethiopian Orthodox tradition considers scripture, and which appeared among the Dead Sea Scrolls, names 7. Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Uriel, Sarachiel, Raguel, and Remiel. Whether you accept all 7 or just Michael, what becomes clear is that archangels operate on a completely different level than standard angels. These aren't messengers delivering notes. These are generals fighting wars across dimensions humans can barely perceive. Daniel chapter 10 contains one of the most revealing scenes in the entire Old Testament. Daniel is praying when an angel appears with an explanation. I heard your prayer on day 1, but I couldn't reach you for 21 days because the Prince of Persia was blocking me. The Prince of Persia here isn't a human king. Scholars widely interpret this as a fallen angel or demonic power controlling the Persian Empire from the spiritual realm. And this angel couldn't break through. He was stuck in a 3-week battle with this entity until Michael showed up. The text says Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me. And suddenly the blockade shattered. Michael is who they call when regular angels can't finish the assignment. He's the heavy hitter, the closer, the one whose title in Jude is simply the Archangel. Daniel also mentions that Michael will stand up during the end times, during a period of distress unlike anything since nations began. When the worst moment in human history arrives, Michael is the assigned commander. That tells you everything about his capability. Then there's Gabriel. Gabriel doesn't fight wars. Gabriel carries information so critical that the wrong delivery could alter the entire trajectory of human history. He's essentially heaven's highest clearance courier. Gabriel explains Daniel's visions about future empires. He tells the priest Zechariah that his wife Elizabeth will have a son named John, who becomes John the Baptist. And he walks into a room in Nazareth to inform a teenage girl named Mary that she's about to conceive the Messiah. But there's a moment that reveals Gabriel's actual authority. When Zechariah hears he's having a son, he questions it. How can I be sure? I'm old and my wife is well along in years. Reasonable question. Gabriel's response? I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God, and I have been sent to speak to you and tell you this good news. And now, because you did not believe my words, you will be silent and unable to speak until the day this happens. Zechariah walked out of the temple mute. Could not speak a single word for 9 months. He asked for proof and Gabriel removed his ability to talk. That's not a gentle messenger. That's a being with authority to override human biology because someone questioned the source of his information. I stand in the presence of God isn't a humble introduction. It's a credential so high that doubting it brings immediate consequences. If you accept the Book of Enoch and broader tradition, the other archangels become even more intriguing. Raphael's name means God heals. In the Book of Tobit, he disguises himself as a human traveler to guide a young man on a dangerous journey, revealing his true identity only at the end. Uriel, whose name means light of God, is traditionally credited with warning Noah about the coming flood. These aren't minor side characters. They're directors of massive cosmic operations. And there's a detail about archangel warfare that gets completely overlooked. Revelation describes a war in heaven, where Michael and his angels fight the dragon and its angels. This isn't metaphorical disagreement. The Greek word used is polemos, the same term for full-scale military conflict between nations. Heaven itself became a battlefield. Revelation says the dragon was not strong enough and the rebel angels lost their place in heaven. Michael didn't just hold the line, he drove them out entirely. When you consider that a third of all angels joined the rebellion, Michael commanded the remaining 2/3 and achieved total victory. That's the kind of general we're discussing. Archangels operate as direct extensions of divine will. They move between dimensions, command armies of lesser angels, wage wars against principalities influencing entire civilizations, and carry announcements that reshape human history. But even they rank below the next creature. And this is where the Bible starts getting genuinely uncomfortably strange. Because creature number 5 doesn't look like anything you'd expect an intelligent being to look like. It looks like a machine. Forget everything you think you know about what heavenly beings los. Okay, like. The Ophanim are where the Bible goes completely off the map of anything we'd consider normal. The prophet Ezekiel describes them in chapter 1 of his book. And the description is so bizarre that scholars have debated for centuries whether Ezekiel was being literal, metaphorical, or whether Hebrew simply lacked words for what he was actually witnessing. Here's what he says. He saw wheels, giant spinning wheels. But these weren't chariot wheels. Each wheel existed inside another wheel, intersecting at right angles like a gyroscope. Imagine 2 hula hoops pushed through each other at 90-degree angles, both spinning independently. That's the starting point. And the rims of these wheels were tall and terrifying, Ezekiel says, and covered in eyes. Not a few eyes. The rims were full of eyes all around, hundreds of them, all open, all watching, a living geometric shape made of intersecting rings covered in eyeballs. The Hebrew word ophon literally means wheel. That's what these beings are. They're wheels. Not angels with wheels, not creatures riding wheels. They are the wheels. Geometric shapes that are somehow alive, conscious, seeing in every direction simultaneously, and moving with what Ezekiel describes as perfect coordination. He says wherever the Spirit wanted to go, the Ophanim went. They didn't turn. They didn't slow down or change direction like a car makes a turn. They just moved instantly in any direction, as if the concept of facing a particular direction simply didn't apply to them. Ezekiel adds a detail that makes the whole thing even more surreal. He says the wheels glowed like chrysolite, which is a yellowish-green gemstone. So picture giant, glowing golden-green gyroscopes covered in hundreds of unblinking eyes hovering above the ground without any visible means of support, moving in perfect sync with the cherubim and producing a sound that Ezekiel compares to the roar of rushing waters or the voice of the Almighty. Daniel adds another layer. In chapter 7, Daniel describes God's throne and says the throne has wheels of blazing fire. Scholars widely believe these are the same Ophanim that Ezekiel saw. They appear to be integrated into the throne of God itself, either as part of its structure or as its locomotion system. Some rabbinical traditions say the Ophanim never stop spinning. Their perpetual rotation is what generates the energy that sustains the heavenly realm. Other traditions interpret the eyes as an expression of God's omniscience. The idea that absolutely nothing in all of creation goes unseen. The eyes don't sleep. They don't blink. They watch everything everywhere all at once. Yes, the Ophanim look a lot like how science fiction describes alien spacecraft. The gyroscopic movement, the hovering, the brilliant light. Some people have argued that Ezekiel was describing a UFO encounter, and that ancient Hebrew prophets were actually witnessing advanced technology they had no framework to understand. Whether you believe that interpretation or not, what's undeniable is that the Ophanim don't fit any conventional image of angels, demons, or any spiritual being in any religious tradition. They're genuinely one of the strangest things described in any ancient text, religious or otherwise. The medieval Jewish philosopher Maimonides actually ranked the Ophanim second in the angelic hierarchy, just below the Chayot HaKodesh, the holy living creatures which he considered the highest. Other Jewish traditions placed them third. Christian theology generally folds them into the broader category of thrones, one of the 9 choirs of angels described by the 5th century theologian Pseudo-Dionysius. But regardless of where you rank them, their function seems clear. They are the mobility system of God's throne, the living machinery that allows God's presence to move through creation. And the fact that God's throne needs a transportation system at all raises a question that theologians have wrestled with for centuries. If God is omnipresent everywhere at once, why does his throne need wheels? The answer most scholars land on is that the Ophanim don't represent God moving. They represent God's concentrated, localized presence moving, the specific point in space where God's glory is most visible, most intense, most overwhelming. And when that presence moves through creation, reality itself bends around it. But living wheels covered in eyes aren't even the strangest thing Ezekiel saw that day. Because moving in perfect sync with the Ophanim, fused to them in a way that Ezekiel struggles to put into words, were the creatures he initially calls the living creatures. It took him until chapter 10 to realize what he was actually looking at. And when he did, the name hit him like a brick, because these weren't unknown beings. They were cherubim, the same creatures described in Genesis, in Exodus, in the Psalms. Except nothing in those earlier books prepared him for what they actually looked like up close. If the Ophanim shattered your expectations, the cherubim are about to demolish whatever's left. Because the gap between what the Bible actually says about cherubim and what popular culture turned them into might be the single biggest rebrand in the history of Western civilization. Those cute chubby babies with tiny wings on Valentine's Day cards? Those are called putti. They come from Roman art. They have absolutely nothing to do with the biblical cherubim. The real cherubim are war machines. Here's what Ezekiel describes in chapters 1 and 10. Each cherub has 4 faces. One face of a human looking forward, one face of a lion to the right, one face of an ox to the left, and one face of an eagle at the back. 4 faces on a single head looking in all 4 directions at once. They have 4 wings. 2 wings stretch upward and touch the wings of the cherubim next to them, forming a kind of canopy. 2 wings cover their bodies below. And underneath the wings, Ezekiel says, are human hands. 4 human hands, one under each wing. Their legs are straight with no knees, no joints. The soles of their feet look like the hooves of a calf, and they gleam like polished bronze. They don't walk the way we walk. They move like lightning, darting in any direction without turning their bodies because they have a face pointing in every direction. They never need to turn. They just go. And between the cherubim, Ezekiel says, there was something that looked like burning coals of fire, like torches moving back and forth. The fire was bright and lightning flashed out of it. So you have these 4-faced, bronze-hooved, 4-winged creatures moving like lightning with literal fire and lightning flickering between them. Now, here's why the cherubim matter beyond just looking terrifying. They're guards. That's their job. And the things they guard are the most sacred objects and places in the entire biblical narrative. In Genesis 3, after Adam and Eve eat from the tree of knowledge and are expelled from Eden, God stations cherubim at the garden's east entrance. And he gives them a flaming sword that turns in every direction to guard the path to the tree of life. Not a locked gate. Not a wall. Living 4-faced warrior creatures with a weapon made of rotating fire. Think about what that implies about the tree of life. It must be extraordinarily important, maybe the most important physical object in all of creation, if God designed that level of security for it. He didn't just hide it. He made it impossible to reach. The cherubim also appear on the Ark of the Covenant. Exodus 25 describes 2 golden cherubim facing each other on top of the mercy seat with their wings stretched out to cover it. And God tells Moses something remarkable. He says there, above the cover, between the 2 cherubim that are over the Ark of the Covenant law, I will meet with you and give you all my commands for the Israelites. The space between the cherubim's wings is the exact spot where God's voice manifests on earth. That tiny gap is the interface between the creator of the universe and the physical world, and the cherubim are the frame around it. Psalm 18 takes it even further. It says, God mounted the cherubim and flew. He soared on the wings of the wind. Ezekiel saw them carrying God's throne through the sky. They're not just guards, they're throne bearers. They're the chariot that carries the presence of God wherever it goes. The ancient cultures surrounding Israel had remarkably similar composite creatures. The Assyrians had the lamassu, massive winged bulls with human heads that guarded palace entrances. The Egyptians had sphinxes. The Babylonians had similar guardian figures. Some scholars believe the cherubim represent the original concept that all of these cultural echoes descended from. And there's another dimension to the cherubim that scholars love to debate. The 4 faces have been interpreted as representing the 4 pillars of created life. The lion is the king of wild animals. The ox is the strongest of domesticated animals. The eagle rules the sky. And the human face represents earthly intelligence. Each cherub carries a representative from every category of life, as if the entire created world is compressed into a single guardian form. Early Christian tradition actually mapped these 4 faces onto the 4 Gospels. Matthew is the human, Mark is the lion, Luke is the ox, and John is the eagle. Whether that connection is intentional or coincidental, it shows how deeply the cherubim imagery embedded itself into the foundation of Western religious thought. You can find them in cathedral art, medieval manuscripts, and church architecture across the entire world. They've been watching over humanity's sacred spaces for thousands of years, but we're only at number 4. And the creature above the cherubim in the heavenly hierarchy does something that none of the others do. It doesn't guard. It doesn't carry. It doesn't watch. It screams. And it has never stopped. The word seraphim in Hebrew comes from the root seraph, which means to burn. These are literally the burning ones, and the only detailed description of them in the entire Bible comes from a single chapter, Isaiah 6. Isaiah describes a vision where he sees God sitting on a throne high and exalted, and the train of his robe fills the entire temple, not just drapes over the throne, fills the entire building. That's how massive this vision is. And hovering above the throne in the air are the seraphim. Each one has 6 wings. 2 wings cover their face, 2 wings cover their feet, and 2 wings are used for flying. That's already bizarre, but think about what it means. These beings exist in the direct presence of God, closer to Him than almost anything else in creation. And they cover their own eyes. They shield their own faces from what they're standing next to. That tells you something about the intensity of God's presence in its unfiltered form. Whatever God actually looks like, it's too much even for the seraphim. The creatures literally made of fire still have to look away. The feet are covered too, which in ancient Hebrew culture was a sign of deep reverence and humility. So the seraphim, beings infinitely more terrifying than anything on earth, approach God with a level of humility that suggests the gap between them and God is vast beyond comprehension. They're not His equals. They're not His peers. They're His attendants, and they know it. But here's the detail that defines the seraphim more than anything else. Isaiah says they call out to each other back and forth without ceasing the same words over and over. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of His glory. And when they speak, Isaiah says the doorposts and thresholds of the temple shake and the entire building fills with smoke. Their voices physically destabilize architecture. The sound they produce is described the way you describe an earthquake or a bomb going off. The book of Revelation, chapter 4, picks up this exact same image and takes it further. John describes creatures around God's throne who day and night never stop saying the same declaration. Never. They've been saying these words since before the earth existed. And according to the text, they haven't paused once. Not for a second. Try to wrap your mind around that. Beings made of fire with 6 wings covering their own faces because even they can't handle God's full presence have been crying out the same 3 words on loop for longer than time has existed, and their voices shake buildings. Then comes the moment that makes Isaiah 6 one of the most dramatic scenes in the Old Testament. Isaiah realizes where he is and what he's seeing, and he completely panics. He says, "Woe to me! I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty." He thinks he's about to die. In the Old Testament, the common belief was that seeing God meant death. And in that moment, one of the seraphim flies to him. It's holding a live coal that it picked up from the altar with tongs. Even the seraphim, beings literally made of fire, use tongs to handle this coal. Think about how hot something has to be for a creature that is fire to need a tool to pick it up. The seraph presses this coal against Isaiah's lips and says, "See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away and your sin atoned for." A creature made of fire cauterizes a man's mouth to purify him, so he can survive standing in God's presence. That's not a bedtime story, that's a medical procedure performed by a supernatural being. And there's one more layer to the seraphim that scholars argue about constantly. In Numbers 21, when the Israelites are wandering the desert and complaining, God sends fiery serpents among them that bite and kill people. The Hebrew word used for those serpents is seraphim. Same word, same root. This has led some scholars to argue that the seraphim might not be the humanoid winged figures we imagine, but might actually have a serpentine appearance. Winged fire serpents hovering around God's throne, screaming holy forever. Whether serpentine or humanoid, the seraphim are the highest-ranking beings described in regular worship around God's throne. They exist at the absolute edge of created reality, the boundary line between what was made and the one who made it. And there's one more implication to the seraphim that deserves attention. Their unceasing worship isn't just a ritual. Jewish and Christian scholars both point out that the triple repetition of holy is unique in the Bible. Hebrew doesn't have superlatives the way English does. You can't say holiest in ancient Hebrew. Instead, you repeat a word to intensify it. Saying something once means it's true. Saying it twice means it's very true. Saying it 3 times means it's the ultimate expression of that quality. Holy, holy, holy is the Hebrew equivalent of saying this is the most holy thing that could possibly exist. And the seraphim say it on an infinite loop. The very fabric of heaven vibrates with that declaration. 7 creatures made before humans took their first breath. Some guard the most sacred places in existence. Some carry God's throne across dimensions. Some burn with fire just by existing. One was so perfect it started a war in heaven. And these descriptions sit in plain text across Genesis, Ezekiel, Isaiah, Job, and Revelation. They're not hidden in obscure manuscripts or lost translations. They're right there, waiting for someone to actually read them. The Bible spends more verses describing these beings than it does describing what heaven actually looks like. Yet somehow, most modern interpretations skip right over the details that make these creatures genuinely alien to human understanding. The ancient texts preserve something that doesn't fit our sanitized versions of spirituality, something older, stranger, and far more powerful than we've been led to believe.